Do you ever feel like the woods are watching you? Not in that paranoid someone's looking over my shoulder way, but like the trees themselves have eyes. I swear I used to laugh at that notion, but something changed last summer. It was that damned lake, the one tucked so far back into the woods that most folks in Parsonfield don't even know it exists. Hidden Lake, they call it. It was just before dusk when I got there, the sky a bruised purple, the air heavy like it knew something I didn't. I was alone, as usual. That's how I like it, just me, the rod, and the quiet. But the quiet wasn't right that evening. It was too thick, too smothering, like a blanket thrown over the world. I was reeling in my line when I saw him. A man hunched over by the water's edge, half hidden in the shadows. He was messing with a barrel, rusted and beaten, but what caught my eye was the liquid pouring from it, thick and dark, staining the lake like ink in water. Blood. It had to be. There was too much of it, pooling on the surface, spreading out like fingers. I yelled at him like an idiot. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" My voice shattered the silence, but he didn't flinch, just turned his head ever so slightly. That's when I saw his eyes dead, hollow like they'd seen too much and didn't care anymore. He bolted, ran into the woods like a deer spooked by a hunter. I should have let him go, but something made me follow, at least for a few steps. The shadows swallowed him up, and I couldn't hear anything but the sound of my own breathing. I didn't stick around. Hell, I practically ran back to my truck, heart pounding like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. But as I got closer to home, that feeling hit me, the one that says you're not alone. The crunch of leaves behind me, the snap of a twig. Someone was there, following me. I could feel their eyes burning into my back. I made it inside, locked the doors, and grabbed my shotgun. Stupid, maybe, but I wasn't taking any chances. Then the knocking started. Soft at first, like they were testing me, seeing if I'd crack. The door, the windows, all around the house. It was like they were everywhere at once. I didn't move, just sat there in the dark, gun across my lap, waiting. Hours passed before it stopped. The silence was worse. That's when I heard the window shatter, glass exploding inward like a bomb went off. I swung the gun around, and there he was, the same man from the lake, standing in my living room like he belonged there. He wasn't alone, though. There was something else, something I couldn't see but could feel, lurking just beyond the edges of the light. He took one look at the shotgun, and whatever courage he had drained out of him like water from a sieve. He bolted out the door, disappearing into the night. I didn't chase him. I wasn't that stupid. I called the cops, but by the time they showed up, the barrel was gone. No blood, no trace of the man, nothing. They said I was lucky, that I scared him off. But I knew better. I wasn't the one doing the scaring. Whatever was in that barrel, whatever he was trying to hide, it's still out there, somewhere in those woods, waiting. And I don't go fishing alone anymore. My father, John, always loved the solitude of fishing. It wasn't just the catch that drew him in, but the quiet moments in between, the kind that let you hear your own thoughts, or in some cases, things you wish you hadn't. This time, it was supposed to be a simple trip, a weekend away from the grind. Just him, my Uncle Matthew, and a few old friends, Rich, Jeff, and Monty. They chose a cove miles away from civilization, a place that didn't exist on most maps, several hours from the nearest marina. The kind of spot you'd need someone to show you, otherwise you'd never know it was there. It was perfect, too perfect, now that I think about it. They arrived as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the water. It was serene, too serene, like the world had forgotten them. But as night fell, a dense fog crept in, swallowing the shoreline and erasing the sky until it felt like they were floating in nothingness. They laughed it off, of course. They were seasoned outdoorsmen, and a little fog wasn't going to scare them. But this fog was different. It was thick, cloying like it waited, like it was something more than just vapor. It smothered the sound and made everything feel distant and muffled. It was as if the cove was cut off from the world, suspended in its own little pocket of existence. John and Matthew decided to search for a cell signal, hoping to check in with the real world and let their families know they hadn't drifted off the map entirely. They left the others on the boat, venturing into the woods that lined the cove, following a path they'd barely marked earlier. That's when they heard the clicking. At first it was subtle, almost like the distant chirping of crickets, but too rhythmic, too mechanical. It came from all around them, bouncing off the trees, growing louder with each step. They stopped, straining to pinpoint the source, when the clicking was pierced by a sound neither of them would ever forget: a scream, raw and guttural, like something being torn apart. It echoed through the fog, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Panicked, they turned back toward the boat, but the fog was thicker now, the path they'd come in on barely recognizable. As they hurried, the clicking followed, faster, closer. Then figures began to emerge from the mist, more than 10, maybe a dozen, dressed in tattered, tribal clothing, faces obscured by shadows and fog. They moved with an eerie grace, their bare feet silent on the forest floor, as if they weren't walking at all, but gliding. John and Matthew didn't think they just ran. The others were already on the boat, the engine sputtering to life as they reached the shore. The group of figures had gathered just at the water's edge, watching with those dark, empty faces. But they didn't follow. They just stood there, waiting, as if they knew the men would be back. That night, they drifted far from the shore, the boat anchored in the middle of the cove. No one slept. They kept a watchful eye on the water, on the fog that never quite left, and on the distant shoreline where those figures had stood, waiting for something that, deep down, they knew was inevitable. They didn't speak of it again, not to each other, not to anyone. But the memory of that fog, those clicking noises, and those figures in the mist would follow them for the rest of their lives, a shadow that grew longer with each passing day until it consumed them. It was one of those mornings where the world feels half asleep, the air heavy with mist that curls off the water like lazy ghosts. I decided to go fishing at this little lake upstate, one of those spots that barely shows up on a map. I was after peace, maybe some trout, but what I got was something else entirely. I just cast my line when I noticed them across the lake. 3 figures, dressed in dark hoodies, the kind that make you think twice before asking for directions. They were digging into the muddy shore, their movements quick and deliberate, like they had someplace to be. Then, one by one, they started tossing things into the lake. It was strange, sure, but I figured it was none of my business. The fish weren't biting, and the weirdness on the other side of the lake was just another thing to ignore. Or so I thought. But curiosity's a funny thing. I waited until they were gone, then rowed over to where they'd been standing. The water was murky, but something shiny caught my eye. I hooked it with the end of my pole and pulled it up. It was a gun, a 9mm, heavy and cold in my hand. My stomach did this slow flip, the kind that tells you you've just stepped into something you really shouldn't have. I called the cops, not because I'm some kind of hero, but because I didn't want to end up on the wrong end of that thing. They came out, did their routine, and dredged up a few more items: a keychain, some foreign coins, and a locket. The locket had a picture inside, but they didn't show me who it was. That should have been the end of it, just another mystery in a small town full of them. But then, a few nights later, I heard footsteps around my yard. The kind of deliberate steps that belong to someone who's looking for something. I stayed inside, lights off, my breath stuck in my throat. The police came by again, did another sweep, but nothing turned up. No more clues, no more noises. Just me, alone with the kind of quiet that makes you question everything. Whatever those figures were up to, they left me with more than I bargained for. And now, every time I hear the wind rustling the trees or the creak of a floorboard at night, I wonder if it's them, coming back for what they lost. It was fall at the shore house, that time of year when the leaves turn crisp and the lagoon seems to hold its breath, waiting for winter. My friends Kevin, Ariane, and I had planned a fishing trip, but the damn boat was out of commission. So we were stuck with the beach and the piers, a far cry from the open water we'd hoped for. The beach was a gray expanse, the kind that seemed endless in the late afternoon light. We set up our gear, casting lines into the chill of the lagoon, hoping for a striper, but the fish didn't seem interested. The water was unnervingly still, not a ripple to break the silence. Kevin was the only one who had any luck. He hooked a small bass, nothing to write home about, but it was something. Arian and I, on the other hand, could only watch as he pulled it in with a kind of grim satisfaction, as he'd just made a deal with something he shouldn't have. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving us with a sky the color of old bruises. We packed up as the darkness settled in, the night pressing in on us like a heavy curtain. The beach, now shrouded in shadow, seemed to stretch on forever. The lagoon's surface was an unbroken mirror, reflecting the emptiness of the darkening sky. As we trudged back to the shore house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. It was the kind of paranoia that creeps up your spine, whispering in the silence. We went inside, our footsteps echoing hollowly in the empty house. The warmth of the fire did little to dispel the chill that had settled in our bones. That night, as we sat around, the wind outside began to howl. It was a mournful sound, like the wail of some lost soul trapped in the lagoon's depths. We tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched never quite left. It hung in the air like a dark cloud, a reminder of the quiet unease that always seems to follow a day when things don't go as planned. Kevin's bass was the only thing we had to show for the day, a small trophy in a place that seemed to promise more than it gave. It lay on the kitchen counter, a reminder of our failed venture, and as the wind howled through the night, it felt like a bad omen, a whisper of something we couldn't quite understand.